Welcome back, everybody. This week we're going to talk about engineering and facilities. We're going to use those terms kind of interchangeably. The folks who make our facilities and the workplaces we have run. So we're going to talk a little bit about them, what they do, how you interface with them, and then a little bit about ESRM. So this week we're going to talk about the basic functions of engineering facilities partners, how these functions impact what you do as the security manager, and how you might work together. And I've phrased a lot of these slides in the forms of questions for you to think about how things interact with each other, because I think everybody kind of knows what facilities people do, but we're going to talk about that. The reading is going to go into how the government approaches the relationship with facilities people and security people, and I think that's a pretty interesting model, and we're going to have hopefully a robust discussion on that model. And then we're going to talk about the risks that might be unique to engineering facilities functions and how we work with engineering facilities in our ESRM model so that we get, again, a holistic and complete look at the different risks and might have some overlap in how we can mitigate those risks together. Just a quick look, because we have security and we've talked about human resources, we've talked about finance. Now we're adding another member of the family, and we'll be adding more as we go along. And engineering facilities are going to become part of that ESRM model, part of that family, part of that group that makes decisions about risk and owns the ESRM model. When we talk about engineering facilities, to make sure we're all on the same page, these are just, again, not a comprehensive list, just as we really couldn't make one with HR and with finance, because different finance departments, different HR departments do more or less things depending on the organization sometimes. But these are the most basic functions of an engineering and facilities department. And they are in charge of building design and construction. So they may not be the people who actually construct the building, but your engineering department would be the interface with potentially a builder or a designers, architects to build new construction. They plan space. So where do people sit? How much space does a person need? What type of space does a function need? And what types of amenities might they need, right? Is this a cube farm? Are these individual offices? Do certain functions need certain types of offices or office space? They handle repairs and maintenance, which is very important because not only is that for the good of the operation, to make sure you can run and the things you need run properly, but also if you've ever worked in a facility where the maintenance is just not taken care of, it can be very frustrating. It can lower morale, and people will tend to move on from workplaces that just aren't maintained well. It's a kind of indicative of the fact that the business is not run well. Capital project management, we discussed capital projects in the finance unit. And normally the engineering and finance people handle capital project management. Not always. Sometimes IT will, if it's a pure IT project, or another department may handle a pure project. But even with security projects, I've normally had a project manager designated by engineering facilities that will come in and manage the project, take care of the contractors who come in and pull wire for cameras and mount them and program them and commission them, and they manage the finance end of the project as well. So capital project management is normally a function delegated to the engineering department of a organization. And then very important, utilities management. Look, if you don't have power, you can talk generators and battery backups all day long, but those are fail-safes and temporary solutions. So, if your utilities are not robust, you're going to have issues. So that's a very important function of engineering and facilities. So now that we know just the basic functions of engineering facilities, let's talk a little bit about how that impacts and how that meshes with what the security manager does. While you're doing that, on a side piece of paper, as we're talking about each one of these different functions and how they might impact you as a security manager, start to think about what some of the risks might be to that engineering facilities function, those people, what they might be thinking. And just kind of try to get into the risk manager mode, if you will, and think about some of the things that you might want to ask them about risk. If you get into that ESRM model where you're sitting around the table and you're talking about risk to every different department, sometimes people aren't as open or they just can't verbalize it. So start thinking about some of the questions you might ask about some of these things to pull that risk information out from the engineering facilities folks. So in building design and construction, we're talking about any new construction and renovations, even minor renovations. If you're moving a door from one side of an office to another because of an egress issue or because you want to house two people in that room and the door was in a bad place to put two desks, right? You want to split it up somehow. You still need to look at any type of renovation or new construction through the risk and vulnerability assessment lens. So every building modification requires a new risk and vulnerability assessment, even if it's informal. Again, if you're just going to move a door in an office, install a new window, you're not going to set up a formal appointment to go in and do a full written risk assessment of that window, unless whatever's housed in there is extremely important, right? And you would probably know that. But even informally, you have to say, okay, we put a new door or window in. Is there going to be more traffic by that door? Are people going to be looking in the window, and now do we need to worry about hiding information or hiding valuables in there and putting shades on that window so at night they can be drawn so there's no smash and grab activity where someone would smash the window, reach in and grab things that look good. So, that's one of the types of things that you need to understand. And remember, every building modification requires a new risk and vulnerability assessment, even if it's informal. You have to think about what's housed in the new building, right? What are you going to put in the building? Is it an R&D building? Is it a warehouse? Is it a record storage area? Is it a warehouse that you're constructing like a pole barn, as we call them here in the Midwest? I don't know if that's what you call them in Pennsylvania, but a simple tin warehouse, and you're going to use it to store old office equipment that, frankly, you just as soon get rid of anyway. That's going to be less of a security risk than your R&D building where you house all of your crown jewels of research, right? So you have to understand what's housed there. Did the renovation in and of itself make something else more vulnerable? So you have to then start to look at, okay, we put that new door in that office, but now there's going to be a lot more traffic down a particular hallway. And in that hallway, I have another resource that I'm protecting, and maybe I want to make sure I beef that up because there's going to be much more traffic. So you have to look at the renovation or the new construction and say, did this construction impact something else that's normally adjacent to it? Crime prevention through environmental design. I'm sure that those of you who have taken the basic security course before understand what that means. For those who have not, and there's a couple of waivers in the course, CPTED principles basically say that it's easier to design in security and crime prevention into a building than it is to put it on later. So think about if you design a building and around that building you put a water feature all the way around. It's 50 feet wide and you just have bridges that come across. Much easier to protect that building because now you only have to protect really the bridges, because most assailants will not go through the water to get to the building, right? They're going to come across those bridges. It's really the old story of the moat and the bridges in the days of old. The moat was an environmental design feature of the building for security purposes. So you have to think about, was CPTED used? And if so, what features are in there and are they appropriate? And you need to make sure that you're the person who secures your seat at that table for new construction. Oftentimes, new construction is thought of, and the engineers kind of think about security later on. And you need to have a relationship with your engineering folks right from jump. You really need to this is a relationship you really need to build. You have to have one with HR, certainly. You have to have one with finance, certainly. But this one is a really important one because things can get done and security features can be forgotten. And now you have to backtrack sometimes and understand the risk and go in and put features in later. So make sure you secure your seat at the table on discussions on new construction and renovations very early in your first job as a security manager. Go visit that engineering person and understand how you can be part of those discussions on renovations and build in security early. While you're working with engineering and facilities, and this normally falls in between the two pseudo disciplines, if you will, they're kind of the same in a lot of ways, at least in the business side. But think about space planning. If they're going to put executives on the front of a building with big picture windows so they have a really nice view of the lawn, they've also made them more vulnerable to someone coming up from the outside and harassing them, someone driving a car into the front of the building, someone putting a bomb or a device that is a fake bomb even against the glass and shutting down that executive wing. HR the same way. Do you want HR buried deep in the facility so that when they fire somebody and they happen to be in the HR suite to do that, you've got to march them all the way through? Do you want them right on the edge behind those glass walls on the outside of a nice office building where everybody can see who's in talking to HR? Or do you want some happy medium? And space planning is hugely important for you from a security perspective because you want to talk about The distance you have to travel if something would happen from a response, plus, the whole idea of some idea of privacy for certain functions. Medical is a big one. If you have a medical, and I know the EHS, the safety majors in the course, you'll probably have the medical department reporting to you or with you. They normally fall to the safety side. And if that happens, do you want to have that medical office buried deep in the facility so when someone comes in and just tell the company nurse they don't feel well, grips their chest, and now you have to bring an ambulance through and a gurney through, and you have to make sure all your hallways are unobstructed. You have to make sure all your doorways are a proper width. Those things, you'd hope that all of your hallways would be unobstructed, but welcome to reality, folks. People store stuff in hallways. If your medical facility is close to a dock area where you can bring an ambulance into a covered dock and bring a gurney very quickly to the medical facility, that's a win. So there are certain things you can do with space planning that really will make your job easier. Cube farms are very, a big thing because it's a cheap way to have office space with some level of privacy. But that opens up a whole information security and security of personal effects issue where people put, the framed silver picture frame of their wedding picture on their desk in their cube farm. They're very proud of that. And someone steals it. They don't want the picture. They want the silver picture frame. And you will, as a security manager, spend a good deal of your time chasing your tail, looking for picture frames, coffee cups, and the like that get stolen out of cube farms. So are there certain functions where, let's not worry about the coffee cup, but if there was something more important stolen, are there certain places where closed door offices are more appropriate based on function from both InfoSec and personal effects security? You may want to discuss that with engineering. And then, of course, space for your own security needs. A monitoring center that is going to monitor alarms from any facility that is not yours in the U.S. should be UL listed if you're doing it for a fee. And certain companies will do that. You will have a warehouse that belongs to someone else that has your goods inside, and you say, we will monitor the alarms for you, and you take a certain amount off the rent. That is technically a service for a fee, and your center should be UL listed. In order to do that, it can't have any windows to the outside. And so that's just one minor consideration. May not apply to you, but there are considerations for your own space that you want to think about: the privacy, the ability to respond, whether you want to be able to be seen or not in a certain area, are all considerations for space planning and reasons for you to interface with the engineering and facilities folks very early. So repairs and maintenance is a great way for you to interface with engineering and facilities in a positive way to make the friendships you're going to need to be successful. So first off, repair shops are just theft magnets. That's probably, I won't say it's number one, but it's high on the list of areas in any facility. If you have a repair shop where there are tools, where there is copper piping perhaps, where there is wire, the peripherals, the nuts and bolts and screws, people will go into those areas and take. And sometimes they take for their office, but they still take. And when they do, the inventories go down, and when you need those parts for a real problem, they're not available. When you need that wrench to fix a real leak, you go to reach for it, and someone has taken it or moved it or whatever. And so, you really want to secure those rooms properly, but still make them available so that the workers can get in and out. But you also need to think about, if you have security patrols, could they not be trained to do, as we talked about with safety, to do safety patrols, to also do maintenance level patrols? Can they check on gauges? Can they check on belts and hoses that may have just been changed for smells and sounds and those types of things that indicate that something might be wrong? Training your folks, or having the engineering and facilities folks help train your folks on those rounds, makes them more productive. I will tell you, the guards like to do that stuff. Believe it or not, they are always looking for things to do. I've seldom found, I must say, a guard that will tell you, I don't want to do that particular thing, because it can be a very boring job and they're looking for things to break the boredom. So you can make friends by saying, we can help reduce your maintenance costs, right, by early identification of issues. And you can also, be part of a monitoring program where you actually generate records. You go to an area each shift and you check the gauge to make sure it reads in the green, not in the red, and you check it off. You're doing a service for the engineering department. And that's something that really will make those friends you need to get you that seat at the table I talked about on making the risk assessment decisions on new construction. So repairs and maintenance is an in for you. make sure you take advantage of that opportunity. So in capital projects, major projects need security coverage often. If you're going to build a new building, at some point you're going to have the shell built, and then you're going to store the rest of your materials inside that shell to complete the inside of the building. And you're not going to have access control on the outside of that building yet, because in some cases you won't have wiring conduit to run card readers and locks and things like that, electric locks. So you're going to need guards. One thing to remember is when you're asked to provide guards for a capital project, those costs can be capitalized. They're not always capitalized, but they can be. And if you think the money is going to have to come out of your budget, you should ask your engineering person, the lead, the project manager, if you will, on that capital project, about the costs. Where can they go so that they don't hit your budget, they hit the cost of the project, which you don't have to pay the depreciation on. So basically, you don't have to absorb any of that cost yourself. Sometimes a major project will create vulnerabilities all on its own. So let's talk about that building again. We're putting up this shell of a building, and we haven't quite finished the shell, but we have big spools of copper wire that sit out on the construction site. As soon as the shell is built, we're going to start pulling wire inside so we can have electric, so we can see what we're doing to finish the inside of the building with lights, right? And that spool is sitting there, and it's creating a vulnerability all on its own. So you're going to have people who will at night come in, cruise your construction site, and look for things to steal. So you have to think about on capital projects, what about the security concerns of raw materials, of building materials that might be left out? Also, doors have to be left open sometimes for various reasons. Fumes. The flooring in many commercial buildings is a poured flooring made from epoxy. You can't just close the doors and pour that unless you want to start counting the dead bodies of workers. So doors may be propped open. There's security need there. You also may have a high number of unscreened workers. So if you're going to bring in people to put a roof on a very large building, those roofers generally won't go through your normal process of background checks. And at some point, they're going to want to get into the building to use the restroom, to use the telephone. It may start to pour rain or snow heavily, and you have to get them inside for some reason. You will have a large number of unscreened workers anytime you have a capital project. There's really no way around that, but you have to consider it and have a discussion with your engineering project manager about that. And there's a term called turnkey. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but essentially it's when let's say you're going to build that pole barn, right? You essentially just say, look, we're going to spend $500,000 on this pole barn. Here, Mr. Project Management Company, here's $500,000, get it done. And you don't do anything. They take care of all of the features, all of the subcontractors. They will hire the person to put in the foundation, the people to bring in the metal. They'll buy the metal building. They'll hire the roofers. They'll hire the pavers who come out and pave the parking lot around it, and the painters who come and paint the building. It's all turnkey. You're just paying for an end product, right? Much like you would if you were just going to build a house yourself. You would pay a builder and they would take care of everything. It's called a turnkey project. Unfortunately, turnkey normally cuts security short. So you need to have an understanding with the person who's writing the contract for that all-encompassing contractor who's going to build that building. You need to have a conversation with them about the security features that you need during construction, during planning, and when the building is built, because they're going to put in the bare minimum and they're going to provide the bare minimum because it all goes against profit. So in a turnkey project, when you hear that, that should be a red flag for you to say, okay, I need to get in early. I need to make my needs known very early so that nothing gets left to chance. So utilities is kind of a funny thing, because if you shut down the utilities, you really have shut down your operation. And many companies have backup power, and those of you who are information technology majors will say, yes, but we have uninterrupted power supplies so that nothing gets lost, and then it goes to battery, and then it goes to generator, and we can operate on generator. Let me tell you, when that happens, once you go to generator power, it is not business as usual anywhere, because the generators run on something. And it's normally not natural gas in commercial buildings. It is normally diesel power. Because of the business continuity, you may not have natural gas. If other utilities get severed in a disaster, you may not have natural gas, so you have diesel tanks that run generators. That's pretty standard just about any large facility. And that diesel runs out. Now you normally have a contract with someone. If you've done your business continuity planning and your crisis planning right, you have a contract that says we get a refill every so often during a crisis. We come first, we pay a premium for it, and everything's great. But you really are running on a what-if scenario, and you are reducing load as much as possible on every type of system, be it IT systems, electric systems, water systems. You're going reduced load, reduced operations, and just trying to get by. Your production does suffer. So utilities are hugely important. Utility feeds, and if you go to ride around actually and just look at most big buildings, you'll see somewhere a utility feed coming in. It may be a transformer surrounded by a chain link fence. It might be just a metal box on the outside of the facility. Not just transformers, but also those generators we talked about. Are they protected? And that is a huge risk, because if you lose your primary source of power or water or whatever your utility might be, these outside boxes, if you will, are integral to getting started up again. And if they aren't protected, then now you've got a double point of failure here, and you're going to be that much longer without power. So utility recovery and protection of your utilities needs to be part of your crisis planning. And that is normally a duty shared, if not given, to the security manager. But just don't think about electric power in that way. Think about heating. I live in Michigan. You guys, many of you live in the Pittsburgh area growing up, or Erie. It gets cold there. I grew up in upstate New York. I remember it well. It gets cold there. And if the heat goes out, you might as well shut the doors, because people won't normally work in parkas and earmuffs in an office building. So when you think about utilities, just don't think about the power coming in. Think about, okay, do we have boilers? Do we generate our own heat? How about refrigeration? What's the backup plan for refrigeration if we have perishable goods as a product? Ambient temperature even. If you have air conditioning just enough to keep 75 degrees somewhere for your product. I will tell you that I had a warehouse one time that relied on ambient temperature. One of the products was Luden's cough drops, the ones that come in the box. If you've ever had the cherry ones, they're addictive. They're really great. They're candy is what they are, right? They call them cough drops, but they're really candy. But let me tell you something. When the air conditioners went out for 4 days in August in that warehouse, we didn't have boxes of cough drops. We had boxes of melted cherry goo inside of a wax bag, inside of a cardboard box. So you have to think about all of the utilities. It wasn't the power that went out, it was the air conditioning units on the roof that went out. So if those units are on the roof, is your rooftop protected? Because someone could go and do you harm by just taking out your air conditioning. So the last thing to think about is your own security system, really. And that is, my access, my alarms, my cameras, do they go to a backup power? Are they just on battery? Normally doors are on, if you have a door that has a card reader on it, the lock is controlled by a battery as the backup. And it depends on what type of lock you have. And I'll give you a real short example of that. If you have a magnetic lock, the big magnets that hold the door shut in industrial areas where you run your card and the magnet releases and now the door opens, that magnet is always drawing power. If you have an electric strike or an electric crossover lock where you run your badge and you hear a click and it unlocks the door, that's normally locked and not powered up. It powers up when you click it. So if no one goes through that door and it's on battery backup, it's going to last for quite a while. That magnet gives you 2 to 4 hours tops on a good battery. That's all you're really going to get. So you need to understand your own security systems and what needs power and what doesn't, so you can back up the right things. So utilities, that crossover there is huge, because you have a risk of losing your security system when they have the risk of losing power generally. So a couple of hints here. I phrased everything in questions, just about everything in questions, because I think you know the intuitive answers to those questions, and I want to get you to the point where you know to ask those questions. And so, I think it was a good way to frame this. But there's really just a few answers to these things, and that is to build a really strong, authentic, synergistic relationship with engineering and facilities. You really have to form that relationship before you go ask them for something. It is the nature of the beast that you need to have those friendships built, and they are friendships, really. But we'll call them professional relationships. If that makes you more comfortable, you don't have to be friends, I guess. But you have to have those professional relationships built before you go and ask for things. Otherwise, you're going to get shut out. That means sometimes making accommodations. So, great example, you normally don't have a guard in your facility, let's say on Saturdays. You put the whole thing down on alarm and you shut it down. And the engineering guy comes and he says, hey, I have somebody who needs to come in and finish up a painting job. They come to you on a Friday afternoon. They need to finish up a painting job. It's not capital, it's expense. I just need to have somebody in here for 2 hours. Do you think you can put a guard on overtime for 2 hours to do that? Now, you're going to take 2 hours of guard overtime out of your budget to do that. And you should do that, because that same engineering and maintenance person may be the person you need when your security system takes a dive someday and you need them to go change the lockout real quick. Otherwise, you'd have to post somebody on that door all weekend because the lock isn't working. Making accommodations is not some sort of, bend the rules for somebody, right? Think about the risk and the reward, right? The risk of you running out of money because you sent in somebody for 2 hours of overtime is pretty small, and the reward is to nurture that friendship. There is a give and a take, and it works best with engineering and facilities people, okay? The guy with the wrench matters. He is going to be your lifeblood when you need something fixed, when you need that seat at the table. So I strongly recommend, even more so than HR, who I hope you have good relationships with, and finance, I hope you have great relationships with. This one is one where you cannot survive without those relationships. And it would behoove you to remember that. Relationships are the key to success with engineering facilities people. So let's shift to the ESRM model a little bit and throw engineering into the mix with the others. So let's say that you have a total power outage at your facility, and the engineering department now, that was their risk, right? They had a risk of the power going out because someone a delivery truck backed into a transformer and the power is out, and it's going to take a long time to restore. What's the shared risk here? Well, HR has a risk because do you call employees? All employees say, stay home, there's no power, you're not working today. And if you do that, do you pay them? What do you tell them? That they have to take a vacation day? What is your policy on a shutdown of the facility for an engineering reason? There's a risk that may happen. And now HR, you have the risk of having to do something, right? To make sure that people either do get paid or understand they won't get paid, and the fallout of those decisions. If finance has set up through their procurement a just-in-time delivery for something, so oftentimes, and this is really something that started in the auto industry, I think more than anything else, they got tired of having parts sitting all over that they had to store, that they already paid for, that they weren't going to use for months. And they set up just-in-time delivery. If we're going to make a certain product on Monday, then on Friday is when the raw materials get delivered for that, so we don't have to store it, we don't have to pay for it ahead of time. We can immediately transform that raw material cost into profit, right? But if you set those up and now you're shut down, what happens to the just-in-time deliveries? Can you, in your contracts, you have a risk now of bringing in materials that maybe you can't even store, depending on what your product is, right? If it's something that spoils, and you have no power, you only have a certain amount of backup refrigeration, you've got a real problem. So have you set up your contract so that just-in-time deliveries can be halted with a phone call, or are they automatic? That is a risk that finance has. And then for security, obviously, if the power goes out, now you've got a lot more risk because you don't have the lighting on the outside of your facility, perhaps at night, to make sure that nobody sneaks in, right? So can you still operate your control center? If it's not on the battery backup, then no, you cannot. So there's a shared risk with utilities for all three of those. And if you think about the rest of the functions, as I said when we started, please go ahead and start thinking about the risks in each one of these. I'm sure that you can have some unique risks that you at least anticipate, and you're not even engineering and facilities folks, right? But you'll be able to ask those questions. You'll understand a little bit about the risks that they may face and how that fits in with the other partners at the ESRM table. So here's just a few more based on those other roles that engineering and maintenance, or engineering and facilities rather, play. The whole SEPTED idea, right? Has it been used in building construction? If not, you could raise the price of security, because if you can build it in, it's oftentimes cheaper. And then you might have vandalism. Vandalism, it'll give you a poor reputation in the community. People may not want to work at that facility because they don't feel safe. You've got the facility cost of repair. There's a whole lot of cost involved with something as simple as vandalism, and SEPTED can prevent that, right? So there's a shared risk of all those things happening, the bad reputation of the company, right? HR has to be concerned about that. The vandalism, the fact that something is happening at your facility that's a crime, security manager has to worry about that. And the SEPTED can potentially fix that, which is something that engineering and and facilities can work with you on. Space planning, protection of executives. Then they're employees, okay? But if you compromise an executive, if you are in a big company and your CEO gets injured by someone or becomes the victim of an attack, your stock will tank. And depending on the size of your company, a 10-cent drop in the price of the stock can be $1 billion. So I strongly suggest that space planning be something you get yourself involved in. Repairs and maintenance. If repairs and maintenance goes bad, you can't produce if you have bad machinery. Employees can get laid off. Profits can drop. Now we've got HR scrambling. We've got finance scrambling. We've got the whole manufacturing side scrambling, and security has to scramble with them because those were all risks that could have been mitigated with proper repairs and maintenance and discussions about that as a risk to the facility. And then, again, with capital project management, if you can't use capital equipment because you can't get it in and get it installed properly and in a secure way, something happens to it, you'll have tax issues. You have, again, idle workers. So there's so many intertwined risks in the engineering and facility side that intertwine with HR, with finance, and with security. That is why looking at all of these things together in the ESRM model makes perfect sense to look at security holistically. So now our new ESRM family, and it is certainly not the full slate of people we will have at the table, is security, HR, finance, and now engineering and maintenance. We found there are some shared risks. There can be some shared responses, right? We can help them and they can help us. Some shared mitigation. So we close, by helping each other, we close some of those risks, at least lessen them. They never really go away, but we make them less impactful. And we're protecting the entire enterprise. Our security program, our enterprise is being protected by our security program, not just the things that we normally think about, like making sure nobody sneaks in the door. Now we're looking at everybody's functions, everybody's risks, and we're using what tools we have as security professionals to help plug up risk to the enterprise, which is really the way you make yourself successful in this game. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about deliverables for this week. There's the lecture, and you're all done. Thank you for your attention on this. There's reading. There are a couple of DHS documents. They're really ESRM related. They don't come right out and say it in the articles, but the one article, you'll read the entire article. The other one is just sections 5 and 6. You can read the whole thing if you like. I found it interesting, but some may not. But we're going to use that for the basis of our discussion this week, which is going to be a real academic discussion because there's not a right or wrong. And I'm just going to ask you to give me your opinion on the model that the government suggests and whether or not you think it would work. And there are a number of factors that may or may not make it work, so we'll get into those in a minute. But your initial post is due on Thursday at midnight. The reason it's due Thursday is there's a minimum of 2 responses due. And I put die. No, it's due Sunday at midnight. And remember, I put notes on just about, a whole lot of folks. I'll just say that. The minimum number of posts I asked for and responses I asked for is just that, minimum. If you do the minimum and they are quality, you will get 3 of the possible 5 points on that line in the rubric. That's the minimum, and you've done the minimum, and the rubric is there for you to understand what you need to do to get all in the highest level column if you so choose. We could debate whether or not you got it or not, but it's pretty easy to tell what you need to do to get a perfect score. And the minimum number of responses gets you right in the middle of the number of points on that line. And then there's another one that says you've done more than the minimum, and you've done a little bit more. And then there's one that says you've done even more than that, and you really added to the discussion. I would encourage you to use simple mathematics. If you get a 3 for just doing the minimum, you'll probably get a 4 for doing 1 over the minimum. You'll probably get them all for 2 over the minimum. Do a few more. It doesn't. Once you get into a discussion with someone, once you get into a back and forth, I'm not at all concerned at that point about the 100-word response. Then sometimes it just becomes a few sentences back and forth. Once you've got the minimum number of discussions out of the way with the 100 words, then you're okay. After that, I'm not going to really start counting words. And I have counted words on some of these because some of you have been shortchanging us a little bit. But I won't be counting words all the time when it comes to responses. Once you get past the minimum, then it really just becomes quality. Are you carrying on a real discussion back and forth and trying to make your point? And so if you want more than the minimum grade on that, please do more than the minimum number of responses. So the DHS documents that you'll read really kind of advocate for a facility committee to help discuss and vote on risk. And the committee part, the ESRM model, is clear there. That's exactly what I'm asking you to do, is to really join a committee together at some point to talk about holistic risk. That's huge. It gets a little bit different, though, because in the government, they have a formal process where everybody gets a vote around the table. And that, to some extent, makes me a little uncomfortable. To you, it may not, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on this, right? But does that weaken you as a security manager if you're asking others to vote on risk? I happen to think that risk is something that I am somewhat of an expert on. And I would think that the people who I have at the table are not. They're only experts in their individual risk. Therefore, will they potentially advocate for more than their share of the limited amount of money we have to mitigate risk? Will they be of such a strong personality? Perhaps let's put it this way. Suppose you have a committee and you have the vice president of engineering and facilities on it, and the HR person sends in a junior generalist to be on your committee. I would think that vice president has some implied power at the table, that their opinion is going to get listened to and yielded to on a more regular basis. And they may have things that they find to be risky, and they want you to close those risks 100%, no matter what it costs you to do that. Whereas your real risk at the facility may be something in IT or something in HR that player is not as strong a player and doesn't advocate as heavily, but they just might give their vote to that engineering person with a strong personality. So does a democracy in this case really work? Because these aren't closed votes. These aren't, this isn't a secret ballot box. But it might. And, does it make sense that the security manager, since you're ultimately responsible for putting the risk plan together, right? Everybody owns the thing together, but you're responsible for putting the plan together as the risk manager in this case. Should you have more impact? Should you have more say-so? I don't know. And what might be a better model? Is there a better model than the committee model? Is it is it an anonymous, web board that you talk to different sections with, so no one knows who from the department is giving the answers? I don't know. But I want you to know, and I want you to tell us what you think after you read those articles, whether or not the government's model of one department, one vote on risk is appropriate, if you think there could be problems with it. And, once you get into the response, I want you to look for people who have a different angle than you, and let them know what you think is right and wrong in a collegial way, so that we can get some discussion going on this to see if we can come up with a hybrid or maybe some agreement on what might be the best model for putting together an ESRM committee, if you will, or a model for a modern facility. So again, in your responses, find someone who disagreed with your position is always the best place to start, because it's very hard to argue a point with someone who already accepts your point, right? I don't want you to argue necessarily, maybe it's the wrong word, but to debate, to discuss your position versus someone else's position that might be different. Part of the key to this is being respectful and collegial and convincing them of your position as best you can. But if you get to the point where they say, yeah, I hear what you're saying and I understand what you're saying, but I absolutely disagree for whatever reason, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to say, well, okay, I understand. I still think I'm right, but good job in defending your position. Nothing wrong with saying that, because we're not going to change the world with this discussion. But you would like to try to change someone's mind. So let's have real discussions, okay? Just saying, yeah, I agree with you. Good job. Thanks. Thumbs up. That doesn't really cut it, right? I want real discussions this week. This is a true academic discussion, as opposed to, regurgitate information to me. Please just you go out on the limb and tell me what you think of those articles and whether you think that would work in your practice, and talk a little bit with others about whether or not their response to it is the same as yours, different than yours, and how you might convince them that yours is the right way, or how you might change your mind once they try to convince you. Say, yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a good plan. I like that. See if you can come up with a hybrid. So if you need to talk to me, Many of you now have reached out to me after our quiz last week. A number of you reached out, and that's great. Not a problem in the world. We will certainly talk about anything you want to talk about. But you have to reach out if you want to talk to me. I can't read mine, so please do so. The week after this week is our midterm week. We have a break, and then we have midterms. And the midterm will be 20 questions, quiz format, multiple choice. I think you will find it easier than the first quiz, but you may not. So I don't want to make a promise there, but I think that those of you who have taken the material each week and kept good track of it and took good notes, I think you'll do well. There will also be a one-page written submittal, which is much like a post. I'm not going to tell you what that is just yet, but I will tell you what it is very early before you go on break. I will put the format of the midterm out there for the paper part so that you can get that done if you so desire early. I don't mind early submissions. This is an online class, and so we're not going to sit in a room together to take a midterm, so I can't really say why we would wait if you have it done, get it out of the way, and get on to your other midterms. So as we get toward that, you'll see more about the midterm. No one should stress about the midterm. I have looked at everybody's work in this course, and everybody's capable of doing well. So with that, have a great week. If you need anything, please reach out, and we will talk to you over the course of the week, because I will be involved in those discussions, and I will be the devil's advocate disagreeing with just about everything you say. So be prepared for that. Have a great week.